Last year, my fiance and I finally bought our very first house. It was a modest two-story place in a quiet Georgia suburb. Nothing extraordinary, but to us, it was everything. As an Asian couple, finding a home felt like a huge milestone. We were so excited to start our new life on that typical street, with its neat rows of houses, a simple yard, and a basic fence. This was supposed to be our fresh beginning, a dream come true. Instead, it became a nightmare that stole our peace, and you're about to hear how. The first few days passed uneventfully. We busied ourselves unpacking boxes, exchanging pleasantries with the friendly older couple to our right, and waving to the man across the street. Life felt perfectly ordinary. But then there was the house to our left. It remained silent, its curtains perpetually drawn. A car sat in the driveway, yet no one ever seemed to emerge. The house itself looked neat, well-maintained, but an unsettling darkness always clung to its windows, as if a shadow had settled permanently within. One afternoon, as my fiancée and I hauled groceries from the car, she suddenly whispered, her voice barely audible. I followed her gaze. There, in the front window of that darkened house, a man stood half hidden by the curtain, his eyes unmistakably fixed on us. He didn't offer a greeting, didn't even flinch. The moment he realized we'd seen him, he simply receded into the shadows, vanishing from view. It was strange, unsettling even. But we tried to brush it off, attributing it to mere shyness or an awkward personality. As the week progressed, his presence became a chillingly regular occurrence. I'd catch glimpses of him in his living room window as I left for work, a silent sentinel. My fiancée confided that she'd seen him in an upstairs window while fetching the mail. Each time, it felt like we were being observed, though he would always melt away the instant our eyes met his, leaving only a lingering sense of unease. Then, one night, an incident occurred that shattered our attempts to dismiss him. It was close to midnight. As I moved past our bedroom window, which directly overlooked his house, I glanced out, a force of habit. There he was, in his upstairs window. But this time, no curtain offered concealment, no shadow obscured him. He stood fully exposed, his posture rigid, his face undeniably aimed directly at our room. A shiver of dread ran through me. I froze, questioning my own eyes. The instant he registered my gaze, he slowly, deliberately retreated from view. I remember forcing a nervous laugh as I told my fiancée, "Well, isn't this just great? We've got a genuine creep next door." The following morning, a polite knock startled us. For the first time, we saw him outside his house, standing on our porch. He introduced himself as Gordon, offering an apology for what he called looking like I was spying the previous night. He claimed he'd simply been adjusting something on his window ledge. His smile, though constant, didn't quite reach his eyes, yet it offered a fragile sense of relief. I wouldn't say I instantly trusted him. There was an undeniable strangeness about him. But his apology, however flimsy, was a welcome gesture. Not wanting to be impolite, I assured him it was fine. Later, I confided in my fiancée that he seemed decent, if a bit peculiar. We made a conscious effort to put the incident behind us. Barely a week later, our schedule peace was shattered once more by an event impossible to ignore. In the dead of night, my fiancée jolted me awake, her voice hushed with fear, claiming she heard someone in our yard. Still groggy, I nonetheless dragged myself to the window. A primal instinct to protect compelled me. Peering into the darkness, I saw a figure moving across our lawn. It was unmistakably a man, prowling with purpose, as if searching for something hidden. Without thinking, a defiant shout escaped my lips. "Hey!" It was a foolish impulse, I knew, but it was too late. The figure instantly bolted, rushing towards our gate and slamming it shut with a jarring finality as he vanished into the night. Our backyard was still bare, just a few gardening implements. So theft wasn't my first thought. I scanned the front windows but saw no one. Stepping outside felt too dangerous, a risk I couldn't take. My fiancée and I eventually drifted back to a restless sleep, a knot of unease tightening in our chests. Just a few nights later, the chilling pattern repeated. My fiancée's urgent whisper jolted me awake again, claiming she heard movement just beyond our walls. This time the sound was undeniable, distinct, a faint, persistent rustling followed by a peculiar shimmying. It was hard to place, but it brought to mind the unsettling whisper of something being forced open, perhaps a latch or a fastening. I crept back to the window, and there, silhouetted against the dim night, was a figure in our yard. A cold dread seized my entire being. I shouted, my voice cracking, "I'm calling the authorities!" The figure immediately strode from our lawn, closing the gate with the same jarring force as before. But this time, in the fleeting moment, I caught a glimpse. The outline of his face, the familiar way he held himself. It was unmistakably Gordon. "Gordon!" I cried out, but he offered no acknowledgement, simply continued his deliberate walk into the darkness, as if nothing had transpired. This time, I couldn't just stand by. I ventured outside, inspecting our yard, then the perimeter of the house. A deep, unsteady breath filled my lungs. I knew I could face this immediately. I marched to Gordon's door and knocked. He appeared in an instant, confirming my suspicion that he'd been wide awake. His usual unsettling smile stretched across his face as he began to chuckle, admitting it was him in our yard. He claimed he was merely deterring neighborhood children who frequently scaled fences, saying he'd seen them vaulting from his property into ours. He dismissed it as a common occurrence, assuring me I'd grow accustomed to it. That persistent smile never wavered, but it felt wrong, a mask concealing something sinister. I glimpsed a chilling animosity in his gaze. I didn't challenge him, simply stated my understanding and retreated home. Yet a profound disbelief settled in my gut. I didn't trust a single word. The very next day he appeared at our door again, extending an invitation for Chinese food at his place the following evening, a Friday. We rationalized that accepting might diffuse the tension, allowing us to establish a semblance of neighborly cordiality. That Friday, around 7, we cautiously entered his home. The air immediately felt thick with unease. Gordon already seemed somewhat inebriated, a state that only deepened as he continued to consume wine. He announced he'd ordered an abundance of Chinese dishes, then made a peculiar, almost pointed remark. "I know you two just adore Chinese food." A hollow laugh followed. Subtle, barbed remarks punctuated the early conversation. When the food finally arrived, he settled the bill. We offered to assist with the table, but his refusal was sharp, almost a shout. The entire meal was steeped in a suffocating tension. As he emptied more glasses of wine, his demeanor shifted drastically. His comments grew bolder, shedding their passive-aggressive veil for outright hostility. He uttered things that left no doubt about his disdain for an Asian couple settling in his neighborhood. Initially, we attempted to disregard his words, praying for the tirade to cease. But his voice swelled, his anger intensifying. He worked himself into a frenzy, ranting about the town's supposed history as a white community. His pronouncements became truly alarming, making us both feel profoundly unsafe. Then, with chilling frankness, he confessed. It was indeed him in our backyard on those previous nights. No denial, no attempt at concealment. Prepare yourselves for a tale that reveals how even the most enchanting destination can shroud the darkest horrors. We simply rose and fled. We practically ran back to our own home, not daring to speak until we were safely inside, every door bolted shut. Lost and desperate, our only recourse seemed to be our other neighbors. We went from door to door, recounting a horrifying encounter with Gordon. Some reacted with genuine shock. Others, however, displayed no surprise whatsoever. I'm here to provide helpful and positive assistance. If you have any questions or need support, please feel free to ask. From that moment, we tried to become invisible to him. We averted our eyes from his house. We confined ourselves indoors, only venturing out when absolutely necessary. But how long, we wondered? Could you truly escape the shadow of the person living right beside you? Each evening brought a suffocating tension, a chilling certainty that his unseen gaze was upon us, or worse, that he might once more invade our space. Then, one terrifying night, a violent crash erupted downstairs. We sprang from our bed, hearts hammering, as the sound of splintering glass echoed through the house. I rushed down to find our living room window utterly destroyed, fragments sparkling across the floor. Amidst the chaos, a heavy, rough object lay conspicuously. There was no message, no explanation, just that stark object. We knew with a certainty that chilled us to the bone who was responsible. It could only be him, yet we had no tangible proof. We immediately contacted the authorities. When officers arrived and spoke with him, he feigned utter bewilderment, steadfastly denying any involvement, claiming ignorance. With no evidence, the police were powerless to do more than record our account, leaving us feeling utterly exposed. We considered fortifying our home with surveillance, contemplated staying to confront this escalating torment. But the truth was, we were paralyzed by fear, utterly drained by the constant mental anguish. A chilling premonition settled over us. Remaining here would only invite a darker fate. Less than 2 months after eagerly unpacking our lives, we found ourselves packing once more. We simply could not endure living beside a man who harbored such animosity, who had trespassed repeatedly and caused such damage to our home. Before our departure, we submitted another detailed report, outlining the full extent of our ordeal. The authorities assured us they would monitor the situation, but their words offered no true sense of security. We fled that house, that entire neighborhood, with desperate speed. We abandoned the home that was meant to be the hopeful first chapter of our shared life. Even now, I believe with a chilling certainty that had we remained, our story would have ended tragically, splashed across the headlines, silenced by the darkness next door. How I yearned for a way to reveal his identity, to expose the man who had terrorized us. But bound by law, all we could do was strive to move forward, to rebuild our lives from the ruins of that nightmare. This chilling saga unfolded a few years back, in late 2021. I am Noah, and my fiancée Gabby, now my beloved wife, had just settled into a new home in a different, outwardly serene suburban area. Prepare yourselves for a tale that reveals how even the most enchanting destination can shroud the darkest horrors. They radiated kindness, even presenting us with a delicious red velvet cake as a thoughtful welcome. We were immensely grateful for their sweet gesture and the delightful treat. Prepare yourselves for a tale that reveals how even the most enchanting destination can shroud the darkest horrors. One night, close to 11, a sudden outburst of shouting pierced the stillness. Peering from my bedroom window, I realized the agitated voices emanated from their house, clearly an intense disagreement. The architecture of our homes prevented a direct view, but soon I watched Veronica abruptly exit, getting into her car and driving away. Silence returned. I recounted the incident to Gabby, and we dismissed it as a simple marital spat, Veronica needing space. A flicker of concern arose. They had seemed so gentle, not prone to such heated exchanges, but we reasoned that every couple faces disagreements. We didn't dwell on it. Later that very week, as Gabby and I returned home, we again heard agitated voices spilling from their house the moment we stepped from our car. Their main door stood ajar, though the storm door remained shut, allowing their heated exchange to reach us with unsettling clarity. We told ourselves it was not our concern, trying to ignore the growing discomfort. Then, a few days later, I observed Veronica's car was absent. I initially presumed she might be away on a trip. Daniel's vehicle remained, and I'd occasionally see him come and go. Days stretched into a week, then 2, and Veronica's car was still nowhere in sight. My wife also noticed, speculating they might have separated, which seemed plausible given our frequent arguments. Yet, her departure felt abrupt, almost instantaneous. One day her car was there, the next it had simply vanished, and Daniel's behavior grew increasingly strange. Whenever our paths crossed, he seemed to deliberately evade us, no longer offering the customary neighborly wave. On the rare occasions I managed to speak with him, his words tumbled out rapidly, and he would hastily conclude the conversation as if consumed by an anxious urgency. A profound sense of unease settled over us. Something was undeniably amiss with Daniel. Prepare yourselves for a tale that reveals how even the most enchanting destination can shroud the darkest horrors. So, seeing Daniel's car in his driveway, I approached his door and pressed the bell. The wait felt excruciatingly long, nearly 3 minutes, before the door finally creaked open. Daniel stood there, looking utterly disheveled. Sweat glistened on his forehead, as if he'd just completed a grueling race, and a peculiar, strained smile stretched across his face, failing to mask a deeper tension. I inquired about Veronica, noting her prolonged absence and the disappearance of her car. He paused, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, before offering a hurried explanation. She just went to stay with her mom for a while, out of state, because she's very sick and she's looking after her. The words felt hollow, a flimsy excuse, though I held my tongue. Had his bearing not possessed such an unpredictable cadence, I might have found myself convinced. My gaze then drifted to a certain sheen upon his brow, a dampness that seemed out of place. A ready explanation was hastily offered, physical exertion upstairs. Yet, his words spilled forth with an unusual haste, a torrent of sound that hinted at a disquiet deep within. Then, a sound tore through the air, making my blood run cold. From somewhere deep within the house, a woman's voice shrieked. It was indistinct, but the terror in it was unmistakable, a desperate cry for aid. I demanded to know the source of the sound. Daniel instantly stammered, "Oh, I'm playing a movie upstairs," adding that he'd forgotten to pause it. The explanation was absurd, a stark contradiction to his earlier claim of working out. I simply nodded, mumbled something about catching him later, and retreated. Rushing back, I recounted every chilling detail to Gabby. Her face mirrored my own alarm, and she urged me to contact the authorities without delay. I made the call, asking to remain anonymous, though deep down I knew Daniel would likely suspect me. I explained to the dispatcher that I'd heard disturbing sounds from my neighbor's house and requested they perform a welfare check. Soon a single officer arrived. Then, barely 10 minutes later, the quiet street erupted with the wail of sirens. 5 police cruisers and an ambulance converged on the scene. Gabby and I scrambled outside, our hearts pounding. Officers swarmed the yard. Daniel was led away in restraints, his hands bound, while Veronica was swiftly carried out on a stretcher, rushed towards the waiting ambulance. We later learned the horrifying truth. Daniel and Veronica's relationship had been a dark spiral of torment. Prepare yourselves for a tale that reveals how even the most enchanting destination can shroud the darkest horrors. Prepare yourselves for a tale that reveals how even the most enchanting destination can shroud the darkest horrors. I'm here to help with any questions or provide information you might have. If you have any requests or need assistance, feel free to let me know. Prepare yourselves for a tale that reveals how even the most enchanting destination can shroud the darkest horrors. I know it was you who exposed me, he snarled, and you'll regret this. Part of me wanted to dismiss it, to laugh at the empty threat from a man now facing severe consequences. But the horror of the situation was too profound. It truly is unsettling how little we know of the lives hidden behind closed doors. Daniel had appeared so friendly, so ordinary, and Veronica too. They seemed like a perfect couple, yet beneath the surface lay a terrifying chasm of hidden darkness. A couple of nights after the incident, I jolted awake in the profound darkness of our bedroom. A silhouette stood over me. As my vision sharpened, a wave of pure terror washed over me. It was Daniel. My heart plummeted into my stomach. "I told you would regret this," he whispered, his voice a chilling echo from reality. In his hand, he clutched a chilling, sharp object. I tried to reason with him, to calm him, to just talk, but he remained utterly unresponsive. I pressed myself back against the headboard, paralyzed. Then, without warning, he lunged. I screamed, and then truly woke up. I lay there, gasping for air, Gabby staring beside me. She asked what was wrong, and I mumbled, it was just a bad dream. She drifted back to sleep, but sleep was a distant luxury for me. The sheer horror of dreaming that the neighbor who had taken his wife's life would break into our home to harm me still sends a shiver down my spine. Most nightmares fade with the morning light, but this one remained terrifyingly real, etched into my memory. The words Daniel uttered in my dream were precisely those he'd spat at me as he was led away in handcuffs. I never confided this dream to my wife. I'm not sure why. Perhaps I feared she'd dismiss it as madness, or worse, that it would simply add to her own burden of stress. After we finally married, we found a new home in a different, peaceful part of the city. Our current house is wonderful, but the terrifying ordeal with Daniel left us deeply scarred. The chilling thought of having lived beside a killer continues to shadow our lives. My name is Dev, and this next nightmare unfolded 2 years ago when I was 24. I was living in a duplex in Queens, New York. A small, aging house split right down the middle. I occupied the left half, and an unknown man rented the right. I never once encountered him, never even glimpsed his face. My landlord simply mentioned he was reclusive and worked late, which at the time seemed perfectly fine. My bedroom was upstairs, sharing a single thin wall with my neighbor's room. Sometimes, if I leaned in close, I could detect faint stirrings from his side. Not unusual for city living, I told myself. For the first week, peace reigned. I toiled through long days, returning home exhausted, grabbing a quick meal, and collapsing into bed. I cherished the simple joy of my own space. Then, one fateful night, the quiet unraveled. I was settled in bed, scrolling on my phone, when a man's voice drifted through the wall. But it wasn't a normal sound. It was strangely high-pitched, like someone deliberately altering their voice. Though faint, the thinness of the wall made it feel as if he stood right beside me. I couldn't make out the words, just an odd, high-pitched murmur. I tried to dismiss it, thinking he might be on the phone or watching television. Eventually, the strange sounds faded, and I managed to drift off. Just a few nights later, the mumbling returned, but this time, it was unmistakably louder, clearly a man's voice. I gently pressed my ear to the wall. It didn't sound like a phone conversation. It sounded like he was speaking to himself. A shiver ran down my spine, leaving me unsure whether to find it absurd or utterly unnerving. To escape the sound, I pulled my blanket over my head. I had an early start for work and desperately needed rest. That, I believe, was the first night I truly understood the disquiet of living there by myself. 2 weeks later, the knocking began. I was drifting in and out of sleep when 2 distinct taps sounded on the wall, right beside my head. It was so startlingly close that I recoiled as if physically touched. I sat bolt upright, waiting in tense silence. Then 2 more identical taps echoed from the other side. This was no mere creak of an old house. This was deliberate. I scrambled away from the wall, trembling. I braced myself for more, but silence descended once again. A foolish urge to tap back flickered, but I quickly realized that any acknowledgement would only invite worse. The following morning, I desperately tried to convince myself it was nothing, that I was simply overreacting. But over the next week, the knocks persisted, sometimes soft, sometimes sharp, always in the dead of night, always when I was trying to find sleep. One evening, they continued for so long that I resorted to headphones and a blaring fan. I lay there wide awake, haunted by the thought of that flimsy wall, how near his room was, how close he was. He could literally be just a couple of feet from me. Each night, the fear intensified. Yet I clung to the hope that it was just him accidentally leaning against the wall, or perhaps tapping it unconsciously. But then came the night everything irrevocably shifted. I'll never erase it from my memory. I was lying on my side, facing that shared wall, eyes closed, but still wide awake. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the street lamp filtering through the blinds. The knocks began again, 3 slow, deliberate taps. I forced myself to stay still, eyes shut, desperate not to react. Then that same high-pitched man's voice pierced the silence, seeping through the wall. It was muffled, yes, but not so much that I couldn't distinguish every chilling word. He asked, "What are you doing in there?" My breath caught, my chest seizing. I shot upright in bed, trembling so violently my teeth chattered. This was no longer a matter of accidental bumps or taps. He was addressing me directly through that thin barrier. I could feel the certainty in his voice, as if he knew I was right there, just inches away. I clutched my phone, my fingers trembling, and dialed my boyfriend. My voice was barely a whisper as I recounted the terrifying words, my mind reeling with fear. He assured me he was rushing over and would stay the night. I huddled in my bed, lights blazing, until he arrived. The rest of that long night, an unnerving quiet settled over the duplex. It was almost worse than the noise, making me feel as though my neighbor knew my protector was there, creating a chilling silence that felt like a trap. For a few days, a fragile calm seemed to return. I tried to convince myself it had all been a strange coincidence, perhaps a trick of sound. But then, just a few nights later, that fragile peace shattered completely. Something happened that sent me fleeing from the house, and it still haunts my sleep. This time, I was in a deep slumber when something abruptly tore me awake. I didn't know the hour, but I jolted upright. Then it began again, a frantic rhythm of knocks against the wall, like someone drumming their fingers right beside my head. Without thinking, a raw cry tore from my throat. Prepare yourselves for a tale that reveals how even the most enchanting destination can shroud the darkest horrors. I had no idea what to expect next, but nothing could have prepared me for what actually happened. I never would have imagined it in a million years. A voice. It came from inside my room. A chilling whisper from the very air around me said, "Go to sleep." It wasn't the muffled sound from the wall. This was deeper, closer, a palpable presence right there in the darkness of my room. I sprang from the bed, a primal scream erupting from my lungs. The moments of my desperate flight through the hallway and down the stairs were a blur. I barely registered the ground beneath my feet until I burst outside, pounding the pavement, screaming for help over and over. I must have looked like a frantic, wild figure. Barefoot, I ran onto the sidewalk, my head whipping around, a cold dread of pursuit clawing at me. I didn't stop my frantic cries until a man 2 houses down emerged, staring at me with a bewildered expression. I pleaded with him to let me use his phone to call my boyfriend, but he insisted by the sound of it that I needed to contact authorities. So, still shaking and choked with tears, I called the police. I waited by the sidewalk, a trembling wreck, until they arrived. When the officers showed up, I recounted the horrifying ordeal, explaining everything that had transpired. They questioned if I was absolutely certain someone had been inside the house, and I affirmed with absolute certainty, yes, 100% yes. They drove me back to my duplex, and 2 officers cautiously entered. My front door stood chillingly ajar, exactly as I had left it in my panicked escape. They reported no signs of forced entry. They asked if I recalled unlocking the door as I fled, but my mind was a frantic haze, a terrifying blank. I told them I didn't think I had, but in my panic, maybe I had. I couldn't be sure. They searched every hidden corner, every room, every closet, under the bed, everywhere. No one was in the house. They even knocked on the neighbor's door, but it remained stubbornly shut. It seemed as though no one was home at all. Eventually, my boyfriend arrived and took me back to his place. Hours later, I was still trembling uncontrollably. Sleep was an impossible dream for the rest of that night. The next morning, I called my landlord, pouring out every detail. I demanded to know who the neighbor was, if he had any history of problems or strange behavior. I also declared that I wanted to break the lease immediately. Initially, he was resistant, citing notice periods and paperwork. But I was adamant. I told him I would not step foot in that duplex alone again, and he had to help me. It took a harrowing day of phone calls before he finally agreed to let me break the lease. My boyfriend became my steadfast protector, accompanying me every single time I returned to the duplex to move my belongings. I refused to go alone. During those days, we tried knocking on the neighbor's door multiple times, but he never answered. It was like no one lived there at all. Yet there were undeniable signs of a presence. Packages at the door, a car in the driveway, but no human response. I ended up seeking refuge with my parents for a while until I could find a new place to live. Even now, a chilling uncertainty gnaws at me. Was that neighbor truly in my room that terrifying night? Did someone else slip past the authorities, unseen? Or was it merely my mind, twisted by sheer terror? I can dismiss the last idea. The line between what's real and what's imagined is usually stark, and that whisper felt too tangible, too close for a mere delusion. My landlord later revealed that the tenant next door eventually vanished too, leaving no trace, no farewell. The truth of what truly unfolded within that duplex remains forever hidden, a haunting question that echoes in the silence.